Hey there guys, and just gonna do a quick plug. If you do enjoy my content, feel free to catch me live up here on Twitch and follow me. I get those notifications, you know. Link's gonna be in the description. See you there. Hello everyone, and welcome back to another video. So World of Warcraft has seen 9 different expansions at the time of making this video, and depending on who you ask, some expansions are better than others. Now, I'm not here to preach that old WoW was better, because maybe for some of you balding 30-year-olds, it was, and I don't blame you for thinking so. I've had the closest experience I can have with classic WoW, and I can say that there are definitely some game designs that I think are better, and some that are worse, and the same thing can be said in regards to retail WoW. With that in mind, I do have somewhat of a possibly atomic take on this, but I want to say that Mythic Pandaria was one of the best World of Warcraft expansions that Blizzard has ever created. Now, for a little bit of context, Mythic Pandaria was the 5th expansion in World of Warcraft, coming after Cataclysm, which, depending on who you ask, was probably the worst expansion at the time. And shit, if you really look at what came before it, I don't blame them. But in retrospect, it was actually a really good expansion compared to some of the shit we get nowadays. Now, I can already hear some of you people typing, "How can you even say something so outrageous when they added fucking pandas into the game?" The only thing I can really say to those people is just don't play a panda, duh. And with the intro out of the way, I'm going to talk about the content that we had during the expansion and just actually how much we had to do. The first and probably biggest part of the World of Warcraft is, well, the world. And the continent of Pandaria had so much to do throughout the whole entire thing. For example, there was treasure that you could find throughout every zone, and some of them sold for hundreds of gold, which back then was a pretty penny before the inflation of Warlords of Draenor. The questing itself in the world was extremely enjoyable, some characters following you throughout the zone, such as Chen Swansao in the Valley of the Four Winds, questing with you and telling you his story until we help him clean up the mess that's going on in his brewery. Helping the Mantids in the Dread Waste was another experience that I still fondly remember, helping all 9 of the Paragons and using their abilities to do the dailies, which made completing the quests easier or helped mix things up a bit. There was so much to do on the islands that were added in later patches as well. The Isle of Thunder had so many different secrets, and the dailies weren't too bad either. They even added the Warlock Green Fire quest, which is pretty good for the time and is still one of the hardest solo pieces of content to do in the game. Lastly, let's not forget about the Timeless Isle, which to this day I still haven't gone and collected everything there, because there's just so much to do. It was such a fun experience running around with a group of people, killing rares, and doing whatever events were going on, popping up throughout the day, and just collecting your coins that you needed to do and getting the reputation that you had to get. Now, the dungeons were something some people might not have liked, which I can understand. With the release of Mythic Pandaria came the remaking of the Scarlet Monastery dungeons, which were condensed from 4 dungeons into 2, as well as changing the boss around and some of the mobs. I played both versions, and each of them had their own charms. Armory was a fast way to grind in Classic and was really enjoyable for some of us that wanted a quick thing of 5 minutes of trash and just get out of there. Skull and Mance was also remade, and I personally really enjoy the remake of this one. The new bosses were much more fun in my opinion, the floating skull following you around, and Lillian Voss being a part of the dungeon made it much more memorable. Remakes were not the only content that Mythic Pandaria had to offer. It also came with 6 brand new dungeons as well, and many of them were pretty fun and unique when compared to the stuff that came before. Who can forget jumping inside a cannon and just beating the shit out of a giant bug until its skull falls off? Or who could forget getting on a barrel of beer and just running over a bunch of drunk monkeys? Challenge modes, which also eventually became Mythic Plus, would also come into the game here, adding more life and replayability to dungeons, which were just kind of a quick way to get geared up and just heading right into raids for the better gear. But nowadays, you could just get as geared as you can in Mythic Plus as you can in a Mythic raid, which is something I really do appreciate about the new dungeon system. And we have that to thank from the original challenge modes. Now, in terms of raids, Mogashan Vaults and the Heart of Fear were the first 2 raids to release with the Mythic Pandaria, and I would say both were pretty solid. The Stone Guards were a fight that many players still remember, and even Amber Shaper was really cool to do. Terrace of the Endless Spring, however, was somewhat of a filler raid, but even at that, Shaw of Fear was a fucking amazing fight and I really enjoyed it. Now, when you ask many players what their favorite raid is, many of them will probably tell you this if they were playing at the time, and that would be the Throne of Thunder. This raid is still amazing to go back to and just look at the bosses, and some of them were just downright bangers. Hordon is just a giant fucking tank dinosaur that bashes into the walls and shit, and it's super fun to fight him in the arena and having trolls jump down on you guys and you need to fight them off. Torturous is kicking turtles and killing bats. What else can you ask for? Bagheerna has a hidden hard mode depending on which heads you kill, which not a lot of bosses have today. Even Dark Animus was a bitch to do in LFR. Leishem was super fun too, a giant fight in a huge grand room. How many other bosses actually get to have that? And even Raw Den, the hidden boss after you beat him on Heroic, was really fun. There are so many cool things about this raid, and going through it is always a pleasure. I and many other people love this raid for what it brought. Now, lastly, for the Siege of Orgrimmar, this was a really good raid in my opinion. You have Siegecrafter, Blackfuse, and Thok. Thok was pretty fun when they were chasing you around. And then you had Garrosh, who had to have 4 phases because they couldn't have a health bar that big. This was all a pretty solid raid. I feel like the problem is, it was just around for way too long. This raid was the most current content we had for a year and 2 months, 14 months altogether. And I can see why people didn't like it. With so little content to do, they probably got burned out and were just like, man, this is the most boring fucking thing I could do right now. Now, this is definitely going to be the shortest part of the video because I legitimately did not PvP in Mr. Pandaria. The only thing I can tell you is I remembered this guy doing his thing and I enjoyed watching every minute of it.